Gabe from Cherryland Woods here. Today we are working with this Russian olive I got. In this piece, I get to use a new tool. I messed up a few times, and overall, it turns out pretty nice. I got this slab of Russian olive from a local specialty wood dealer. I chose to use this Russian olive because the client wanted a darker wood, and I had never worked with a Russian olive before. And since it has so many knots and figuring in it, I thought it'd be an excellent table and tray. I'm going for a 22 by 22 side table and an 11 by 21 centerpiece tray. What I'm doing here is using my skill saw to cut down the big slab into 23-inch and 12-inch length pieces. If anyone has ever worked with Russian olive before, they're gonna know what I'm about to say. This stuff smells really bad. It got so bad at some points that I ended up putting it on my respirator, which I usually reserve for when I'm working with chemicals like epoxy or stain. My dad was around at the time, so I had him help me create the tubs for this table and tray. To make these tubs, I'm currently using 1/2-inch plywood and covering it with Tyvek tape to make the tub. This works fine, but it does sometimes stick to the epoxy, so if you do this, try to use mold release along with it. Now, the audio for these clips was unusable because of my air compressor going off in the background. Now I'm putting silicone caulking in the corners where the boards meet. This is to prevent the epoxy from leaking out when I pour it. When I started buying caulking for these projects, I was stunned by how many options there were at my local Home Depot. There are like 100 different silicone options and like 20 different specifically caulking options. If anyone does an epoxy pour like this, I recommend you get a waterproof caulking and probably the cheapest one while you're at it. On to the second best part of these epoxy projects. Don't know what it is, but these are just so satisfying to do. I do make a mistake though. I tried using a sawdust catcher lid from Home Depot as a vacuum chamber. Yeah, this bucket is supposed to be a circle, not a triangle like it is right now. So after a quick fix of this issue, we can move on. Alright, I've kept you guys waiting long enough. Here's the actual pouring footage. In the background, you may have noticed that I did actually pour 3 things here, but only the side table and the centerpiece tray actually matter right now. After about 12 hours has passed, the epoxy is cured enough to hold the mica powder in one spot. So what I'm doing right now is mixing it up to create swirls of shininess and glitter inside the epoxy itself, which just enhances it quite a bit. Now on to the next step, which is milling down the pieces to their final size. This tool, which is actually a tool built into a tool, is brand new to me. I built it specifically to make this project much easier to do. It's called a router sled or a router mill, and its job is basically the same thing as a planer's, which is to reduce the thickness of the stock that you run through it. The reason I'm using this router sled is that it's significantly cheaper to build when compared to a planer of the same size. For now, just enjoy this time lapse of me planing down these pieces. I noticed after I was done milling all this wooden epoxy that my bit had started to get dull, and that was causing tear out in the epoxy. I fixed this by sanding it out later. And here's my second mistake. I don't have the footage of it happening, but I got startled by a call on my phone while squaring off the side table and gouged the top of it with the table saw. As you can see, I sat around for quite a while figuring out what to do. I decided just to take a deep breath, go to the gym and think about it, and come back later with the fix. Here's the damage report, and it's pretty bad, but not unfixable. My fix is going to be to mill it down, make it look more like a crack, and then fill it with quick curing epoxy or tabletop epoxy. After filling the bubbles and the gouge with epoxy and letting that cure, it is time to dry and wet sand up to 2000 grit. Before we apply the finish, I'm going to use this jig to make holes for the handles to go onto the centerpiece tray. I'm also countersinking the screws to make it sit flat on whatever table or surface it's on. And now it's time for my favorite part of any project, and that is putting the finish on. For the first time I am using Rubio Monocoat, which is a finish intended for use on hardwood floors and furniture. I got the idea to use this from the popular channel Blacktail Studios, which will be linked in the description. The Rubio monocoat turned out great. The epoxy looked almost like glass. It was pretty cool. And this gouge ended up looking great. You can even tell it was a gouge. It just looked like a crack in the end. The tray ended up amazing, especially this little outcropping of figurine. I'm very glad that I chose to use a Rubio monocoat, and I would definitely recommend it for other woodworkers to use. The side table also looks great as well. I definitely think the legs work well with it. The next time I may get less elaborate legs to put on the table. Thank you guys for watching, and if you have any feedback on my very first video, you're welcome to leave a comment down below.